Planning final arrangements, how to make sure I go the way I want. Arranging from some of the details of a burial or cremation and the memorial service can be a great relief to survivors. The death of a loved one is already a taxing episode, and all of us can alleviate our family members' pain and anxiety by taking care of a few things beforehand. Find out more about planning final arrangements. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. How you doing today? I hope you are doing fantastic, and if you are doing as terrific as I am, go grab a cup of coffee or tea or vodka and let's roll. Today I want to talk to you about, I would say, a topic that is important. It may not sound as happy and jolly to some people, but it is important. And the topic is planning final arrangements, how to make sure I go the way I want. The first thing you want to do is don't leave instruction for final ceremonies and the disposition of the body in a will. Why? A will is actually not a good place to express a person's death and burial preferences for one simple reason. He or his or her will might not be located and read until several weeks after the death, long after decisions must be made. So a will should be reserved for directions on how to divide and distribute someone's property and, if applicable, who should get care and custody of his or her children if the person dies while they're still young. In almost all states, a person can use his or her will, or sometimes called healthcare directive, or another written document to express his or her wishes for final arrangements and name a person to carry them out. There are two exceptions. There are two states, New Jersey and New Mexico, that require that a person name this designated man or woman in the will. So the bottom line here is that a will is definitely not the best document where to leave instructions for final ceremonies and the disposition of the body. Another reason why we also want to avoid using the will for this kind of instructions is that if a person, say, lives in two states, so what we call multi-states residency, the delay will be even longer because you have to coordinate. Lawyers or estate planners, estate attorneys, or probate attorneys will have to coordinate things with two states. And we all know already that the probate process in one state is already long. Think about now you have an extra layer of state authority, so you have two states or three states. The whole judicial process becomes convoluted and very lengthy. And this is why, to avoid this, a will is never a good place to express a person's death and burial preferences. The second thing never to do, or to do rather, is to find out the best place to leave written instructions for final arrangements. So we've already seen that a will is definitely not a good place to leave those instructions. So we got to find out now other places to leave those written instructions. A person may have many options for writing down his or her wishes and plans. For example, the individual can write a simple letter to his or her executor and other loved ones, spelling out the details of the final arrangements. It can be a simple letter. It can be an email. If the person writes an email, then the person needs to sign that email. It has to be signed and notarized. So whatever method the person chooses, it's always critical to talk to his or her loved ones about the plans. If a person chooses to write down what he or she wants, that individual, in this case, might let loved ones know where the information is stored and how to get it when the time comes. So the idea here is there are three things to do. Someone who wants to leave written instructions for a final arrangement must first write a detailed plan, a detailed letter, spelling out the instructions. Number two, the person must store the info in a great place. And number three, they need to tell their loved ones about where the information is stored. It's also a great idea to review the plans every year or two to be sure they still reflect the person's wishes, right? It's not about just having instructions for final arrangements and then do it, and 5 years later stuff happens, God forbid the person is no longer around, but their instructions sort of conflicts with their lifestyle near the end of their lives. For example, someone might say, if I ever pass away, please cremate me, cremate the body. And then later on in life, say 1 year before they actually die, they've changed their opinion about cremation. So the instructions that were written 5 years earlier now contradict what the person believes before they die. So there might be some contradiction there, and this is why it is important to update those instructions regularly, frequently. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. I hope you are doing fantastic. We are still talking today about planning final arrangement, how to make sure I go the way I want. If you love the content clarity and quality so far, please consider subscribing to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you can receive more relevant info. We release shows every single day, rain or shine. Of course, shows cover a variety of topics, and we also cover other quote-unquote joyful topics. Share this content, like, and comment below. The third thing to understand when it comes to final arrangement is to get the importance of written instructions with respect to final ceremonies and the disposition of the body. So if a person dies without leaving written instructions about his or her preferences, state law will determine who will have the right to decide how his or her remains will be handled. In most states, the right and the responsibility to pay for the reasonable cost of disposing of remains rest with the following people in order. So I'm going to give you 5 people, and this is in order. In other words, if the person I'm calling first does not have the means or resources to pay for the cost of this disposing of remains, then we go to the second person. All right. So the first person the state reaches out to is the deceased person's spouse or registered domestic partner. Next, the deceased person's adult children. Next, the deceased person's parents. Next, the deceased person's next of kin. And next, a public administrator who is appointed by a court. So we have seen administrators who get involved when the deceased person doesn't have the means, or the state has not been able to find any spouse or registered domestic partner, any adult children, parents, next of kin. This usually happens when you have, for instance, some homeless people or some people who have a home, who are financially comfortable, but they have been cut off from the family ties, and they are not able to meet with their next. They have not been able to socialize with their next of kin in the few months prior to the death. So those written instructions are important. If someone does not want the state to go through that list that I just gave, the list of names, the person must leave written instructions about his or her preferences. Now, one thing we want to talk about here is that disputes may arise if 2 or more people, let's say the deceased person's children, for example, share responsibility for a fundamental decision, such as whether the body of a parent should be buried or cremated. This kind of disputes can be avoided if a person is willing to do some planning and to put his or her wishes in writing. If the person is able to let his or her survivors know the wishes, then we're just sparing them the difficulty of making these decisions at a painful time, right? Because At the end of the day, we already have a death. We already have a dead body, a deceased person. People are mourning. People are sad. People are anxious, and we don't want to add another layer of anxiety to that continuum already. Many family members and friends find that discussing these matters ahead of time is great relief, especially if a person is elderly or in poor health and death is expected very soon. Another advantage of making plans is savings, financial savings. For many people, death goods and services cost more than anything they bought during their lives except homes and cars. So it is important, therefore, to sort of do some comparison shopping, to look around, to compare and contrast, to make sure that costs will be controlled. Here I'm talking about the death goods and services. Everything from buying a casket to paying the funeral home services, those things should be discussed in advance. In most states, if a person makes a healthcare power of attorney, he or she can give the person, he or she can name someone to make healthcare decisions for him or her. And this is called the agent. And that agent has the power to make decisions about his or her remains. I'm talking about the deceased person's remains, if that agent has that power. And the agent must have a notarized power of attorney, a notarized healthcare power of attorney. Now, even if a person does this, the deceased person may want to write instructions about the wishes. The clearer, the better, because the healthcare agent will be legally required to follow the directions, although the agent is not required to pay for the arrangement. So the money will come from the deceased person's assets or family members who are legally required to pay. I've given you already the list, the hierarchy of people that state authorities will reach out to pay for the final expenses. Now, there are two states, only two, New Jersey and New Mexico, that require that a person use his or her will to appoint the person, the agent, who will oversee those final arrangements. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. We are also talking today about planning final arrangement, how to make sure I go the way I want. I want to talk to you now about how to include key details in the final arrangements document. So when a person chooses to include personal preferences in a final arrangements document, it is crucial to do it in a specific way. A lot of folks are moved by customs, religious preferences, or simply their own whims. So a typical final arrangements document might include whether a person wants his or her remains to be buried or cremated, the name of the mortuary or other institutions that will handle burial or cremation, whether or not a person wants his or her body to be embalmed, the type of caskets or container in which his or her remains will be buried or cremated, and that includes whether he or she want this present at any after death ceremony. In some final arrangements documents, you also can see the details of any ceremony a person wants before the burial or cremation, who his or her pallbearers will be if he or she wishes to have some. You can also see how the remains will be transported to the cemetery and gravesite. Some people also like to put in their final arrangements documents where their remains should be buried, stored, or scattered. You can also see the details of any ceremony a person wants to accompany his or her burial, interment, or scattering, as well as the details of any marker a person wants to show where his or her remains are buried or interred. The bottom line here is that in a final arrangements documents, you can see as many details as possible. People can be as thorough as possible. After all, those are people's last wishes. And it's normal, it's expected to have this sort of detail. I also want to talk about services to be expected from a mortuary. Most mortuaries or funeral homes are equipped to handle many of the details relating to the disposition of a person's remains. I'm talking here about the collection of the body from the place of death, the storage of the body until it is buried or cremated. When it comes to making burial or cremation arrangements, funeral homes are pretty good at that. They can help families take care of that, conducting ceremonies related to the burial or cremation, preparing the body for burial or cremation, and arranging to have the body transported for burial or cremation. So it is important for family members or people who are having final arrangements to understand the kind of services to be expected from a mortuary. It is crucial, though, to also understand that the cost of these services vary dramatically. A person needs, therefore, to shop around, especially if cost is an important part of his or her decision. It is important, therefore, to shop around. The great thing is that we currently have multiple websites out there. They do compare and contrast. They do reviews of the services, not only funeral homes, but also for the death goods. So they do a comprehensive review of death goods and services offered in your area. So you might want to double check that, and you might want to see what fits your personal situation or the situation of a loved one. Another thing that is also critical is to understand the possibility of payments. Some mortuaries and funeral homes allow families to do a payment plan, to have a payment plan. If for some reason the deceased person does not have enough assets, or the assets are currently stuck in the probate process, or in a court process, family members or the deceased person can sign up a payment plan whereby they're paying the mortuary or funeral home, say 6 months, over 6 months, or 12 months after the body is interred or buried. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. We're still having a conversation today around planning final arrangement, how to make sure I go the way I want. And if you love this kind of content, please consider subscribing to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you are informed in real time whenever we drop a new show. And we release various shows on various topics every single day, rain or shine. Comment below, share, and comment. I want to talk to you about the fact that people need to know where to turn for help in choosing cost-effective burial arrangements and mortuary services. Because the bottom line for a lot of folks is to keep costs low. Because from an economic standpoint, choosing the institution to handle a person's burial is probably the most important final arrangement that a person can make. So many people therefore join something called memorial or funeral societies, and those societies help them find local mortuaries that will deal honestly with their survivors and charge reasonable prices. Again, those are called memorial societies or funeral societies. So society members are free to choose whatever final arrangements they wish. Most societies, however, emphasize simple arrangements over the costly services often promoted by the funeral industry. The services offered by each society differ, but most societies in the United States and Canada will distribute information on options and explain the legal rules that apply to final arrangements. If a person, for instance, joins a society, he or she will receive a form that allows him or her to plan for the goods and services he or she wants. And the great thing here is that the person can get those deaf goods and services for a predetermined cost. Many societies also serve as watchdogs, making sure that a person gets and pays for only the services he or she chooses. There are membership fees though. When it comes to joining those organizations, it's kind of low if you think about it, because we're talking here about 20 to 50 bucks for a lifetime membership. Lifetime, not monthly, weekly, quarterly, or yearly. Lifetime. So someone who is very concerned about making final arrangements can join this funeral or memorial society in their area and pay 20 bucks, 30 bucks, or 50 bucks for a lifetime membership. There are a very small number of societies that charge periodic fees. So to find a funeral or memorial society near you or a family member, you can look in the yellow pages of a you can look in the yellow pages, or you can also call a number. There is something called the Funeral Consumers Alliance. It's 1-800-765-0107. You can even go to www.funerals.org, funeralsplural.org, funerals.org. For those who don't want to join a society, they can look for a nearby mortuary or funeral home. That means the person will have to shop around to find the institution that best meets their needs in terms of style, location, and cost. One thing that I want to say, and the industry, and they're having a lot of research around it, even the FCC, the FCC, and the Better Business Bureau, BBB, they have done research around it. They have advised consumers to be cautious when it comes to plans that require people to pay in advance. It's better to set aside personal funds to cover funeral goods and services than paying in advance. All right, folks, let's just quickly recap today's conversation. Today I was talking to you about planning final arrangements, how to make sure I go the way I want. Number 1, don't leave instructions for final ceremonies and the disposition of the body in a will. Find out the best place to leave written instructions for final arrangements. Understand the importance of written instructions with respect to final ceremonies and the disposition of the body. Include key details in a final arrangements document. Understand services to be expected from a mortuary. Know where to turn for help in choosing cost-effective burial arrangements and mortuary services. I will see you another time, but until then, stay healthy and morally.